All right, so are you ready to dive into something really different today?
Oh, I'm intrigued. Always up for a challenge.
Okay, well, you've sent over this book, The Gospel According to Malfew Seklew,
Right.
and I gotta say, that title, it doesn't even scratch the surface of what's inside.
It's a wild one, that's for sure.
It's got this weird mix of philosophy going on, like deep thoughts, and then bam, self-improvement advice.
Wait,
And then just when you
yeah.
think you've got a handle on it, it throws in some health tips, too.
That's right. Yeah, it's quite the combination.
All this, and it's all built around this idea of enlightened egoism.
Yeah, and that's a concept that tends to raise a few eyebrows.
I bet. It's like turning morality on its head.
It certainly challenges conventional thinking.
Okay, so before we get too far into the weeds, let's back up a bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the book itself. Who wrote it, when it came out, that whole deal.
Okay.
So the Gospel, according to Malfew Seklew, published back in 1927.
1927, right in the thick of things,
It's supposed to be this guidebook, right?
and a guidebook for life, essentially, or at least that's how it presents itself.
For aspiring supercrats, it says.
Ah, yes, the supercrats. That was a term he coined.
Which naturally leads us to the man of the hour, or at least the man behind the name, Malfew Seklew.
Right, the elusive Malfew Seklew.
And here's where it gets a little tricky, because nailing down the specifics about Seklew is like trying to catch smoke.
He's a shadowy figure, that's for sure. More whispered about than truly known.
Like he plopped into existence just long enough to drop this wisdom bomb and then disappeared.
A true enigma.
The book mentions, like snippets of his life, that he wandered around Great Britain preaching this enlightened egoism gospel.
Right, a wandering philosopher spreading the word.
But anything beyond those little breadcrumbs, it's pretty much non-existent.
Very little to go on, biographically speaking.
Then there's this F.M. Wilkesbarr character. He's the one who actually put the book together, compiled Seklew's teachings, supposedly.
Yes, the compiler, the editor, the man behind the curtain, perhaps.
And to make things even more interesting, we've got Arthur Desmond,
Right, the publisher.
listed as the publisher, but get this, he also ran a bookstore out of the same Chicago address where the Society of Social Supercrats was headquartered.
Interesting. A publisher, a bookseller, and a society all under one roof. It makes you wonder about the nature of this whole operation.
Right. Was this a genuine philosophical movement?
Or a cleverly disguised marketing scheme.
Maybe a bit of both.
It's a question worth pondering.
For sure. But for now, let's get back to this enlightened egoism idea, because that's what really grabbed my attention.
The heart of the matter.
It's this bold statement that, at its core, selfishness is the driving force behind everything we do.
Every action, every decision, all stemming from some form of self-interest. A radical notion, to be sure.
It's definitely got people talking, that's for sure.
It challenges some very deeply held beliefs about human nature. It's easy to bristle at that, right?
Literally.
Because we're taught from day one that selfishness is like the villain of the story.
Right. It's selfish to put your needs before others.
But Seklew, he's like, hold on a minute, let's look at this a different way.
I'm listening.
He's saying every single thing you do, even the things that look selfless, there's a part of you in there, somewhere, looking for a payoff.
A payoff, huh?
Yeah.
So even if I volunteer at a food bank or helped an old lady cross the street, it's not really about them.
Now, hold on. It's not about being intentionally selfish.
Right.
It's more about being, like, really honest with yourself.
So self-awareness is key here.
Yeah, Seklew says most people are walking around doing their thing and they're what he calls unconscious egoists.
They don't even realize it.
Clueless, driven by all these desires and impulses, but they never stop to ask, hey, why am I doing this, really?
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got your straight-up selfish people.
The ones who use others, take advantage, all about number one.
So where does enlightened egoism fit into all this?
That's where it gets interesting. He's got this third category, the social supercrat. That's the goal, see?
Social supercrat. I like the sound of that.
The social supercrat gets it. They figured out that, yeah, you're driven by self-interest. We all are. But it doesn't have to be this limited me versus the world thing.
So it's about like expanding your idea of what's good for you to include what's good for others.
Exactly. Think of a business owner who pays their employees really well, offers amazing benefits. Now, that might look like pure altruism.
Right, like they're just being generous.
But underneath, they know happy employees are good for business, they're more productive, more invested in the company's success.
So everyone wins.
It's win-win. And that's what Seklew is getting at, aligning self-interest with the well-being of others. It's like next level thinking.
Okay, but I'm still wrestling with this whole altruism thing. Right.
Because it sounds like Seklew is saying true altruism doesn't even exist.
Pretty much, yeah.
He thinks a lot of these good deeds are driven by, what, a sense of duty?
Or social pressure.
Like you feel like you should do it, not because you genuinely want to.
Maybe it's about looking good to other people, boosting your own image.
So the social supercrat, they're not out there chasing brownie points.
Not at all. They're
Yeah.
acting from this place of deep understanding that their happiness, it's tied to the happiness of those around them. It's like, we're all in this together, you know?
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
It's deep stuff, for sure.
It is. But before we get too deep in the philosophical weeds, there's something else I want to touch on.
Okay.
Because the gospel, according to Malfew Seklew, it's not all theory and big ideas.
There are some, shall we say, interesting detours along the way. That's putting it mildly. I mean, he's got this whole thing about a lemon cure, advocating for lemon water and dry fasting, no less.
A man ahead of his time, perhaps? Or at least in line with the health fads of his era.
It's like he took a hard left turn into early 20th century wellness guru territory.
Well, you know, those early 20th century health fads, they weren't all bad. Some of them had a grain of truth to them, even if they were a bit out there.
Right, right. And then there's that part where he goes into excruciating detail about the chemical elements that make up the human body. I mean, pages and pages of it. It's like a chemistry textbook snuck into my philosophy reading.
A bit out of left field, you might say. But maybe he saw it as this foundational understanding, you know, like to truly master the self, you got to start with the building blocks, the very elements that make you, you know.
Yeah. Interesting. And speaking of mastering the self, we can't forget about his reimagining of the Sermon on the Mount. He's all, blessed are the strong, and blessed are those who are rich in spirit, flipping the traditional message on its head.
Right. It's like he took this classic text about humility and turned it into this bold declaration of self-empowerment.
It's definitely a different take on things.
He's challenging us to embrace our inherent worth, you know, to step into our power. And that's a message that can be pretty powerful even today.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the gospel, according to Malfew Seklew, what's the takeaway here?
Ah, the million-dollar question.
Right, because it's such a wild ride, this book. You've got these genuinely insightful moments about human nature and motivation.
And then, bam, you're hit with these strange tangents and almost unbelievable claims.
So what are we supposed to make of it all?
You know, sometimes I think the most valuable thing a book can do is not give you answers, but make you ask questions. And this one, it definitely throws some curveballs.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
And that's the beauty of it, right?
Because it would have been so easy for him to just lay out his philosophy, you know, all serious and academic.
But where's the fun in that?
Exactly. But Seklew, or at least Wilkesbarr's version of him, he seemed to understand to really get people's attention.
You got to keep them guessing.
You got to make them laugh a little.
A little shock value never hurt either.
It's like he's saying, look, I know this is deep stuff, but I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of jargon and footnotes.
He's meeting people where they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of what makes the gospel, according to Malfew Seklew, feel so relevant even today.
I think
Because it's not afraid to be a little weird, a little out there.
he's not afraid to be himself, that's for sure.
And in a world that often feels obsessed with fitting in, with following the rules.
That kind of boldness can be refreshing.
Speaking of boldness, we can't forget about Wilkesbarr's little offer tucked away in the back of the book.
Ah, yes. The ego elevation.
For a small fee, of course.
Naturally. Got to keep the lights on somehow, right?
It does make you wonder, was that always part of the plan?
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Like, did he create this whole enlightened egoism philosophy as a way to drum up business?
Or was it more like he stumbled onto this idea, this philosophy, and then realized, hey, I could actually market this.
It's the age-old question, isn't it?
Art imitating life or life imitating art.
Something like that. But I think we can all agree, the gospel, according to Malfew Seklew, is definitely one of a kind.
It's a trip, that's for sure.
So as we wrap things up here, is there a final thought, a nugget of wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
You know, if there's one thing I hope people take away from our deep dive into Malfew Seklew, it's this.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to question everything. Question your beliefs, question your motivations, question the very stories we tell ourselves about why we do the things we do.
Because sometimes those stories, They're not the whole truth.
And by being willing to dig a little deeper, to look beyond the surface,
Then we just discover a whole new way of seeing the world.
and maybe, just maybe, a whole new way of being in it.